Hi everyone, and welcome back to Octopus Builds, where we are building out the Trident project for the fictional company Octopet Shop. My name is Bob Walker, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about rollbacks. So rollbacks is one of those very interesting topics that a lot of people want to do, but there is a lot of caveats and a lot of nuances to doing a rollback. So let's talk a little bit about why it can be so tricky at times. And to do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about release 1.2.3 and 1.2.2. So 1.2.3 was recently deployed to development over 1.2.2. Now, 1.2.3 has a show-stopping bug in it, and this is something that's not really detected during the actual deployment. It could be detected a few hours after the deployment, even the next day, whatever the case may be, depending on the level of testing, depending on any number of different conditions. The unfortunate fact of the matter is, even if you have fully 100% automated tests, bugs can slip through, especially show-stopping bugs. And oftentimes, if you have a lot of automated tests, show-stopping bugs can slip through because it's just a failure of imagination. It's a combination of like 15 different factors that cause that to happen, but it can happen. And so what we'd want to do is we'd want to either roll forward a new version of the code or roll back the previous version of the code. And there are two schools of thoughts to this, because oftentimes a roll forward can be relatively quick. If we took a look here, we could see that this took 2 minutes and 55 seconds to finish running. If we were to count in, say, a build server and everything else, probably 5 to 10 minutes to fully deploy up to dev. Not a big deal, but that's working under the assumption that you have a fix. Another option is if you think that the fix is going to be days or even a week away, then you might want to start thinking about rolling back. But that's when it gets a little tricky, because rolling back code is fairly trivial because you can have multiple versions of the code running at the same time. However, you can't roll back the database. But if I wanted to redeploy this previous release, all I could do is just click on the overflow icon, click on redeploy, and I could redeploy this previous release. Happy days. Not a problem whatsoever. But there is a small kicker to this. Let's talk a little bit about the database. So databases are not really what you call flexible in terms of having certain items removed from them. Even any bit of data, especially for certain kinds of companies or anything like that, any sort of data loss is just not an acceptable thing. Now, if I were to look at 1.2.2, I could see here that I made a number of database changes. If I were to click on this, open up this template, this Delta report, I'd see there's a lot of tables that were created here. To fully roll back this release, to get it back to a known state that I know is good, I would have to delete these tables. Now, in development, probably not that big of a deal. We could probably regenerate the data. QA, a little bit more of a deal, but if we were to let this go to production and we had to have this conversation about rolling back, you cannot delete data in production. Not automatically anyway, and especially not tables, because what has happened is users most likely have started using your system and data is getting inserted into this table. So if you were to roll back and you were to delete all that data, it's going to be a very suboptimal experience at best. If you work in something like the financial industry, healthcare, anything along those lines, deleting data is just not an option. This is, it could be in regards to a bank loan, and if you delete data, now suddenly someone can't get their loan. Or if it's like in the healthcare industry, if you delete something, maybe a procedure isn't approved, or certain notes for a doctor's for a prescription from a doctor hasn't been added or is removed. That is an absolutely terrible thing, and that has a real-world impact. So you cannot go around just deleting data or rolling back to a previous version of your database. But there are certain cases when you can roll back. So let's take a look at 1.2.3. We can see here I didn't make any database changes. I just have a small script granting some role permissions. If I needed to, I could rerun that. There's no risk in me rolling back this code because the database is the exact same. So I could come in here, I could click on 1.2.2, and I could say, I need you to go ahead and redeploy this. And everything would be good, not a big deal. But we don't want to rely on people checking things like that. Ideally, what we'd want to do is we'd want to make sure that we're not running any of these steps, because that's what we're going to do, because we're redeploying or rolling back this code. We don't want to rerun step 1, step 2, step 3, or step 4, or even step 5, because we're just going to be wasting time doing work that we shouldn't be doing at best. At worst, we might run a database change that we don't need to run. And now we're really in a pickle because now we've accidentally deleted data or we've done something even worse. So I've put together a matrix similar to our permissions matrix to talk about this a little bit more. So on a deployment, I want to run all the steps, happy days. But on a rollback, I don't want to run the first 5 steps. I only want to run steps 7, 8, and 9. Same thing with a redeployment. So the difference between a redeployment and a rollback depends on the version that's currently out in the environment. So if I could redeploy this 1.2.2, and that would be considered a redeployment because it is the latest version that's out in QA. But the latest version that was out in development is 1.2.3, and so I'm rolling back from 1.2.3 to 1.2.2. So it depends on the version that's currently out there in that particular environment. But for our purposes, we don't want to run those database steps. So that's a lot of preamble as to what we're going to be doing today. Is essentially we're going to be setting up the deployment process to skip those steps when we don't need them to run. So let's go ahead and let's get started. And first up, I'm going to wonder why I can't add a step to my deployment process. I want to go ahead and create a new branch. I must got a new version where we have protection policies in place. I'm going to go ahead and create a new branch. I'm going to call it Rollbacks. Create a branch from main. All right. Should be able to add a step now. Okay, that's weird. Alrighty, well, I should have been done doing that anyway. I must be just losing my mind. Alrighty, let's go ahead and click on Add Step. And I want to go back to my community steps, and I am going to calculate the deployment mode. So what this is a community step template that I wrote that will go in and it will calculate the deployment mode for us. And it's going to use a series of system variables to make the determination, am I doing a rollback, am I doing a deployment, or am I doing a redeployment? And let's go ahead and I want to move this to the top of my process. Now this step, I know since I wrote it, creates a number. Let's go ahead and commit these changes. Added in calculate deployment mode. So this step adds a number of different things. Sorry, this step sets a number of different output variables. It's one of the first steps I've ever written that I don't have a whole heap of parameters in here. And it's pretty easy to kind of get lost in what it's doing, but these are all of the steps that it's going to, these are all of the output variables that it's creating for us. That way we can leverage a lot of these different things. Specifically, there are going to be run conditions that we really care about. So what this is doing is this is allowing us to be able to set certain things where we only want to run on deploy or only want to run on redeploy. In our case, we only want to run these steps on deploy. So let's go ahead and don't worry about trying to find all this stuff and trying to open this up or anything along those lines. It's just going to make things harder on you. What we're going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and just this will all be included in the description or whatever's down below from this video. It'll just make your lives a heck of a lot easier. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that, cancel that, and let's go back to the project. And so what I want to do is I want to use those output variables to basically skip over steps. Yeah, if you remember in our previous, whoops, let's do this, let's do that, and now I just need the step name. Calculate deployment mode. Run condition. Step name. So what this is saying is I only want to run this on deployment. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to say if Octopus, I'm going to say actually unless .deployment.error, and then I'm going to wrap this up with a /unless. So what I'm saying here is unless there's an error, then determine should I run this on the deployment or should I not run this on a deployment. So basically what it's saying is only run this when a deployment is occurring unless there's an error. And we're going to want to do the same for the generate report step. As well as the approve step. Actually, you know what? The auto approve step needs to skip as well. This already has a run condition, and I think this is a little interesting. So this is going to be looking at step number 4 to make the determination. Well, since this is getting skipped, this is going to return false because it's not set. It's like, I don't have nothing to look at. So we don't have to worry about that. We can leave that as is, and then finally step number 6. We want to go ahead and set that. So assuming everything looks good, we can go ahead and save this, and we can run a couple of test things. So let's say added in the variable run condition to the database steps. So let's make sure everything looks good, and hopefully I didn't break a whole bunch of stuff. Let's go ahead and click on deploy. And so, talk a little bit more about what's happening here with this calculate deployment mode. What it's doing is it's grabbing all of the system variables that are out there and it's making this determination. It's going, okay, what was the last thing that was previously deployed to that particular environment? So in this case, it was 1.2.2. And then it says the current release that I'm deploying right now is 1.2.4. And then it's going to say, okay, the current release number is greater than the previous release number, so we are deploying. That's how it's making this determination. And we can see all of the variables that are being set, which is really nice. It's a good way to basically check to see if I should or should not run these steps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the magic of editing, and I am going to wait for this to deploy, and then I'm actually going to cause another deployment, and then I'm going to try to roll back to this. So bear with me, I will be back in just a second. All right, I'm back. So what I've done is I have deployed 1.2.5 and 1.2.4 out to development. It's actually the other way around, but we'll get there in the end. So what we want to do is we want to roll back to 1.2.5, excuse me, 1.2.4. Now, if we do this right, if everything is set up correctly, we should see the first batch of steps get skipped with the deploy and the notify, and this should actually only run on failure. So really that should be like, yes, maybe. So ideally we should only see 2 steps get run. So let's go ahead and let's redeploy this to our development environment. Now you might be asking yourself, is this a bit overkill for rollbacks? Most likely, yeah. This is more along the lines of just a safety mechanism to make sure that you can properly roll back without causing all kinds of havoc. If you are not even considering rollbacks or anything along those lines, this isn't really necessary. I would probably recommend rolling forward whenever possible. Generally, that seems to be the safest, but this is something that can be used when if your QA team is blocked or your development team is blocked and you need to get code pushed up to the next environment for a variety of reasons. If QA is blocked and they can't continue with their testing because of some minor code change or some minor thing that's going to take hours to fix, then yes, it makes a ton of sense to go ahead and redeploy the previous release. Wow, this has taken a substantial amount of time. Of course, I waited a few seconds and I have to reacquire the lease. So while we're waiting for this to run, I want to walk you through a little bit about some other changes I made to the process. You now will notice that I have these descriptions popped up. So what I did is, while I was waiting for a few other things to finish running, as well as I kind of went away for a little bit, I added in notes. And if you have never seen the notes before, there's a link that says show notes or whatever the case may be, and it uses Markdown. Now, I like doing this once we start getting into rollbacks, skipping steps, having some logic inside of your deployment process. It's always a good idea to add in some sort of note. And this is mostly for future you more than anything. So when they look at the deployment process, if someone comes in, they can see rather quickly, okay, this always runs, this runs on deployments, always runs, always runs, always runs on failure. Got it. Have a brief overview of what's going to happen in that step. Good to go. I don't have to think about too much. I don't have to click into each step. This is just more of a nice to have type of thing. You don't have to do it. I like to do it. It makes things just easier in general, but I'll really only do it once I start adding in this logic to skip steps or do anything along those lines, just because it just gets a little crazy at times. So we should see this. So we'd see it skipped step number 2, and it should have, now it's acquiring all the packages. So we should see it skipping steps 3, 4, and 5. And now we'll see it skip step 6. The reason why it's reacquiring the packages is because there's that manual intervention in there. So now we see it just ran step 7 and 8. So this is set up exactly how we want it to happen. The next thing that you'd want to do if you were setting this up is, if you rolled back like this, the recommendation is to come in here and to block progression. And you can do that by clicking on the release and clicking on the overflow menu and say rolled back to 1.2.4 because of a show bug or something like that. So I'm going to prevent progression. So what this will do is this will prevent this from being pushed up to QA, even though it has been deployed, even though it's been deployed to dev and it satisfies our lifecycle requirements. Again, this is something that it's a break glass in case of emergency type of thing, to manually roll back like this. Now, that being said, I will actually show you in future videos how to automatically block the release progression of a rolled back version if you do in fact roll back. So that will be in the upcoming videos, but for now, for today, what we've done is we have set up our process to skip steps 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 if the calculate deployment mode detects that a rollback is happening. And that's exactly what we want to do. We don't want to accidentally redeploy any sort of database changes, accidentally rerun any scripts that we're not supposed to run, or anything along those lines. Just, I think only bad things will happen. Now, that being said, your rules might be different. You might have a situation set up where you can run a series of scripts and they're only going to run once against that database. It is completely dependent on you. The reason I wanted to show you this is because this is a way that you can skip steps based on certain logic that you have in place, specifically if you're rolling back or rolling forward. So thank you very much for watching and have a great rest of your day.